Last but not least, let's welcome Adrian Lee, who is the lead front-end developer at Truffles, and he'll be talking about live streaming your smart contracts.
Oh, this thing, yeah.
Front, back, and this is the light.
This is what's it?
Front, back, the light.
Okay, perfect. All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks to all the organizers for leaving the best presentation for last. It's good to kind of wrap it up. So thanks to the sound guy, AV, and all that, and all the clapping. It's totally not set up beforehand. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about live streaming your smart contract. So let's get started. Start with a quote. This is a quote by Brett Victor, someone who puts a lot of time into understanding what makes programming easy, enjoyable, learnable programming, as you can see in the link there. I'm just going to read it out. People understand what they can see. If a programmer cannot see what a program is doing, she can't understand it. So it's all about providing visibility to what's actually happening as you're making your dApp, right? Because a lot of times things are happening on chain and you don't even know, what's the state of your contract, like what events are being fired. These are all questions that are really hard if all you did was like a Truffle init or maybe some other framework. You have no idea what's going on until and I'm coming from a very front-end perspective, obviously. So, it's all about, this talk is all about seeing the smart contract state. So a little less about, making mutations and writes, but more about like trying to read and understand what's going on. So these are some of the things that, I particularly want to see, and I think things we want to see when we're making something, right? We want to be able to read constant method calls. So these are things like getter functions in your smart contract, all right? It could be like getting the balances, whatever accounts you have on that smart contract. Second thing would be like contract events. Everyone wants to watch events. That's kind of what they're for, right? And finally, just the whole contract state in general, right? Like what is on the contract itself, right? Let's see if we can do something about that. So using web3.js, which I know, a lot of people don't like it, and there are a lot of issues and criticisms about its API, but it is the most popular one, and it is one we're going to talk about today. And this is how we do it currently. We have the my contract instance, and we do .methods, .getCount, and once we have that specified, we call .colony, and we get one value, right? That just happens by itself, as in like one-off. And for contract events, if you have a WebSocket provider, you can subscribe to it and do all these different things. But if you don't, and you want to make sure that you write your dApp so that you don't assume people have certain types of providers, we have mycontract.getPastEvents, and that'll just give you all the events with that particular event name. And finally, contract state. There's just no way for you to, right now, use web3.js to just give me all the contract state. It's just not possible, not unless you take the logs and decode them and stuff like that. So we're presenting today something called Drizzle Utils, and it's not really related to Drizzle completely. It's a completely separate library. Drizzle will actually use it under the hood, but think of this as a completely separate library. But we call it Drizzle because it's kind of attached to the front-end side of what we're doing at Truffle. And the main thing to take away from this is we're using RxJS everywhere for this. And if you're not familiar with RxJS, it's a stream-based library, so we're going to think about not in terms of variables, what this variable is storing at a certain point in time, but RxJS, thinking in streams and observables, allows us to abstract away the concept of time itself. That sounds really wishy-washy, but it sounds cool, so that's why I said it. All right, so let's go through an example, right? We're going to come up with a very, very simple increment counter. That's kind of what we do as front-end developers, right? I'm not sure, I don't think there are too many front-end developers here, but we're always about the increment counter because it's the simplest thing you can implement that has some kind of state into it. So we have the counter smart contract. All it stores is a uint count of 0. Notice that it's not a public variable, so we got to have the getCount getter function. We have that. And then we have the event called update, which basically gets updated, gets emitted every time the increment function is called. So very simple. You call increment, brings up the number, and emits an event. And well, first of all, how do we use Drizzle Utils? We set it up very simple. We import it either via CommonJS or ES6 imports, and then we pass in your Web3. As long as it's a Web3 1.0, it will work fine. And then, because it returns a promise, you gotta await it, and then you get your Drizzle utils instance. And it does a little bit of magic behind the scenes, but not as much as Drizzle does. It doesn't create a Redux store for you behind the scenes. You'll see later on, it's a little bit more pluggable. And for the first example, the method call stream, right? What we have from above here is the traditional Web3 way of doing it. And I said that before. You call your mycontract.methods.getCount, and nothing actually happens until you do .call on top of it. And this is, again, one-off, right? With Drizzle utils, we take the first part of that, so mycontract.methods.getCount. That's the actual method you want to call, right? And then we pass that into what's called a create call stream function. So in RxJS, the convention is the $ represents stream. So the way to read that is like const count stream equals await Drizzle utils create call stream. And then we pass in that particular method call. And what happens after that is once you have the count stream variable, you just call .subscribe on it and update your state. You log it out, do whatever you want, right? So it's really interesting because now you have 2 lines that'll basically make that call for you every time there's a new block in the chain. Similarly, for event stream, like I said before, this is how you do it in the Web3, the current Web3.js method. But with Drizzle utils, you call Drizzle utils.create event stream, pass in your Truffle contract artifact. We might support other things later on, but and then you create the event stream. Now, here's the interesting thing about RxJS is you can map, filter, merge. You can even do higher order observables, make API calls on these particular events, and trigger whole sorts of things, right? So for this particular one, notice that the event stream represents all the events that this contract will give us. But if we're only curious about the update event, we pipe that stream through a filter, and we want to filter for only the update events. And that's just a very simple example of the things that you can do with streams. You can do an hour talk on the different operators that you can do on RxJS streams, but this is not an RxJS tutorial. So once you have that, you subscribe to it, update your state. Very simple. As you can see, like 3 or 4 lines. And finally, the contract state stream. We want to create a state stream with the Truffle contract artifact so we pass in the Truffle contract artifact, we call create state stream, and we're going to get the state stream variable. And subscribe to it, log it out, for example, or update your state. And what you're going to get is something like this. This particular JSON gives you the name of the contract, the balance on the contract, and also the variables on the contract as well. With mappings, it's a little bit more difficult because you need to know the keys, so we don't really support that fully yet. But for simple variables like this, I think it's very helpful to just have like a dump of what's on the contract itself. Again, you'll notice like before, I mentioned in the contract, it's not a public variable, so suddenly you don't even need to have like specific getters for a lot of these things. You can actually just do these 2 lines, and all of a sudden you know what your variable is. So I think that's pretty, what happened there? Let's go back. Okay, is it lagging? Oh, okay. Sure. Let's go back 1 slide. Can I use the? Okay, cool. Yeah, and the other thing I want to point out was that you can see under the count variable, the value is 1C because it's hex. But that's all I want to point out. Next, let's have a quick demo of those 3 streams that we talked about. The call method, the events, and also state. So this is a small GIF of a very basic dApp, basically what we had from before. And I'm just going to play it. Very simple. You have your count, and it goes up every time you increment. Obviously, this is happening very fast because it's insta-mined on the Ganache, the Truffle test blockchain. So in real life, you would have to wait for real block times. But the count itself is updated by itself. You can see the contract state JSON, it's just looping. The contract state JSON, it's also updating, and the events are just flowing in, right? This whole entire thing is like a 30-line, 40-line, it's a little bit under 40 lines for the whole React component. It's 1 React component, 40 lines, and if you take away all the UI logic, all of this is actually just only 10 lines of code, right? And it's all the stuff that we had from, I showed you in the previous slides. So pretty cool, right? I think it's pretty cool. Thanks. Thank you, thank you. So under the hood, how does this kind of work, right? I'm not going to go into it too much, but internally, there's an RxJS stream that tracks each new block that comes through. If you're providing a WebSocket provider, we would basically use the Web3 subscribe methods. If not, if it doesn't support that, we actually use MetaMask's ETH block tracker, and there's a polling interval, and you can actually specify that polling interval if you want. And of course, if you want to watch the new block stream itself, right? If you just call drizzleutils.new block stream, that refers to the actually underlying new block stream, and you can subscribe to it and or filter, map, and do whatever you want with it, and you get that block every time that there's a new block. So a quick shout out to the people on the team. Hazley, been a long-time friend of mine, helped me a lot with this particular library, and Harry Altman, Mike Cease, Nick DeAndrea. These three guys did a lot of amazing work on the Truffle decoder, which is what made the state decoding possible. And at this point, you might think it's the end of my talk, but wait, there's a little bit more, right? So, you know, I was gonna set expectations, right? I got 5 minutes left, that's perfect. All right, so get contract instance. A lot of people say, you know, I hate Truffle contract, I don't like to use it in the front end, or it's breaking my test and things like that. I understand it, I get it. You know, you like your web3.js or ethers or whatever. So we're using web3.js here, right? We have a convenience function here. So these are all just going to be convenience functions. You can pass in a Truffle artifact or an ABI in our address, and it will just give you the web3.js contract instance, the deployed instance as well, right? Just if you're going to use Drizzle utils, you might as well. It does the same thing as what you would do manually with web3.js. Second thing is current account stream. So a lot of times for UX, you know, we want to make sure that the person using your dApp knows what particular account that they're on. So when you switch accounts on MetaMask, you want to just be able to subscribe to it and get that new account and update your state with it, right? Well, now you can. It's just literally just one line. I mean, it's 2 lines here, but it is 1 line. You know what I mean, right? Like, yeah, just convenience functions. And finally, my favorite convenience function is the get web3 convenience function, because for the longest time, we just copy and paste this chunk of code that'll get the web3 from what used to be window.web3 and then became window.ethereum. And it's just a lot of work that, I mean, it's 2019. Who has the time for all this, right? So yeah, you can, so it's a separate utility from like the main Drizzle utils core, but it's part of the same mono repo, just because. But yeah, so we require it. And then we can pass in your options. What are these options? Let's find out. The first thing you want to do is, well, this is the actual order in which we decide which provider to use. You can provide yourself a custom provider, and it'll always try to do that. But if you don't, it'll actually fall back to the window.ethereum, the MetaMask injected provider. If that doesn't exist, then we look at window.web3 to see if you're using a legacy injected provider. If none of those 3 exist, then we actually go to the fallback provider, which is something you can specify. This is kind of confusing to some people at first. It's like, what's the difference between a custom provider and a fallback provider? Well, it's very simple. A custom provider is always checked first. Fallback provider is something you want to put there just in case. And of course, if you put nothing at all, as you know, as it is when you're really lazy and you're just developing something very small and quick, it just defaults to the development provider, which is 9545 on the localhost, not 8545, because 9545 is what Truffle develop console use. There's been a lot of talk about should we standardize all of it in 8545, probably, but the state of things indicate that this is the case. We can have that discussion on the GitHub issues. I welcome more discussions on that. And all of the things that you saw today are supported on the browser, server side, Node.js, of course, and React Native. So you know, you can make your cool React Native apps with this as well. And that's pretty much it. If there's one thing I want you guys to do today is to take a picture of this slide. On the upper, or like on the upper one, the upper QR code is a link directly to Drizzle utils. You can do npm install Drizzle utils stuff today. And thank you so much. I'm going to see you guys, hopefully, as many of you guys as can come to TruffleCon 2019. It's going to be held in August, sponsored by Microsoft, so it's actually getting held on the Microsoft campus in Redmond. The link to that particular event is the bottom QR code there. So that's pretty much it for me. See you guys next time.